Feeling the pinch, Taiwan's consumer confidence hits a 13-year low. Taiwan responds to nationwide protests in China. We look back at what sparked the unrest. A lame duck precedent, Taiwan's ruling party battles on after poor showing in local elections. Scientists say Taiwan's central mountains are growing ever taller. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Ethan Liu. Holiday season is just around the corner, but recent findings spell bad news for retailers as Taiwan's consumer confidence index has fallen to the lowest level in over a decade. Bing Wang explains why people in Taiwan are increasingly worried about the economy and their ability to purchase gifts.
All over the world, rising inflation and growing interest rates have hit consumers hard. And that's no different here in Taiwan. In fact, in November, the Consumer Confidence Index dropped to the lowest in 13 years. The Consumer Confidence Index, or CCI, measures the level of confidence people have in employment prospects, family finances, food prices, economic climate, stock market, and purchasing goods in the next 6 months. On the streets of Taipei, people did not hold back from sharing their opinions.
物价飞涨很多人的薪水都没涨啊。薪水没有涨的话，那你物价涨，他们就不敢消费啊。这个是一个大环境的关系啊。
比较穷的人买了真的有辛苦啊，什么都涨，涨的有的没有钱的真的很辛苦。
Economists say the drop in CCI is definitely being felt by families in Taiwan.
消费信心的调查其实应该是有在反映这部分所产生的影响，就是出口跟制造业它逐渐转弱，那所以造成就是家庭经济有在持续恶化。
Experts say the CCI is expected to fall further as Taiwanese exports will likely drop because of rising inflation. So that means prices won't balance out until inflation and interest rates come under control. So in the meantime, Taiwanese people will be feeling the financial pinch for a long time. Isaiah Zhou and Bing Wang in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
The recent wave of protests in China has found solidarity in places around the world. Protesters in cities such as London, Tokyo, and Sydney called for Chinese leader Xi Jinping to step down. Among the demonstrators were Chinese citizens who are living abroad. Recently, China has been rocked by protests against its strict zero COVID-19 measures. In some cities, protesters have been heard openly calling for the Chinese Communist Party to resign. This level of civil disobedience has not been seen in the country since Xi took charge in 2013. Meanwhile, Taiwanese lawmakers have also voiced their support for protesters in China, calling for an end to the country's zero COVID policy.
我们今天在这里声援的是中国人民，声援的是想要追求自由的人民。这一点，不管是在疫情之下的人们，或者是在东突厥斯坦的人们，在新疆的人们，甚至在香港的人们，我们都是一样的。我们保护的、追求的是一种制度，我们在做的是制度之争，是民主和集权制度的分野。如果今天我们不站出来，其实下一次也许就是我们了。
At the beginning of Tuesday's press conference, organizers held up blank sheets of white paper, a symbol of defiance that has been used at recent protests in China. 3 legislators from Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party spoke at the event. They were joined by Wang Dan, a participant in the 1989 Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protests in Beijing. China will accelerate vaccination of the elderly after anti-COVID restrictions swept the country over the weekend. The unrest is one of the largest China has seen for years. But as James Chater explains, frustration has been building for months.
Across China, protests have erupted. The target, zero COVID policies that continue to paralyze the lives of China's citizens and its economy, nearly 3 years after the pandemic began. But for demonstrators, COVID restrictions were just the breaking point. They're now calling for a free press, democratic reform, and most boldly, for Chinese President Xi Jinping to step down. The protests are unprecedented. They're taking place across several Chinese provinces and are united by common frustrations. Activity has been reported in Shanghai, Nanjing, Chengdu, Guangzhou, Wuhan, as well as China's capital, Beijing. And the world is watching. People overseas are showing their support for the protesters, including in London, Sydney, Tokyo, and Taipei. In China, openly criticizing the government comes with high risk, but frustrations over draconian COVID measures have been building for months. On October the 13th, a protester hangs banners from a bridge in central Beijing, calling for an end to COVID lockdowns and Xi Jinping's rule. In late October, workers flee a Foxconn plant in China's Henan province amid fears of a factory-wide lockdown. And in mid-November, residents of the southern city Guangzhou protests against stay-at-home orders. But the spark for nationwide unrest came in Urumqi, the capital of China's most westerly province, Xinjiang. People in the region have already been living under one of China's longest lockdowns since the pandemic began. On November 24th, an apartment fire there killed 10 people. Locals say COVID restrictions trapped people in their homes, but Chinese authorities dispute this claim. All of this poses a major challenge to Xi Jinping, who recently secured an unprecedented third term as China's president. Xi's reputation is tied to the COVID zero policy, and so these protests are fast becoming one of his presidency's biggest challenges. Alex Chen and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
To find out more about the protests and how Beijing may respond, our reporter James Chater spoke to Dr. Zhuang Jiaying, an associate professor of politics at the National University of Singapore.
How will the protesters deal with this added police presence and some of the restrictions we've seen on social media use? Where do you think it goes from here?
So I think the authorities are trying to control the protests and get it all under sort of more restriction, such that it finally sort of dissipates and wears out. I suppose for the protesters, it's a matter of how much risk they're willing to bear and how much they think they want to challenge the authorities. So I think if, based on the sort of interaction that I've been seeing, I think the protests will sort of dampen down a little. They may be sort of sporadic and sort of come up here and there, unless some other incident really triggers people to get upset, right, for the frustration to bubble over again.
As you mentioned, even if the protests are quashed in the near term, this underlying frustration with restrictions on daily life seems like it will continue. How do you see that tension being resolved going forward?
They're going to find it very difficult to back away from COVID zero until they really have the pandemic there under control. This is because Xi has basically owned the zero COVID policy, right? He has attached it to his own legacy. What we have with this current round of calls seems to be a recognition among some, I wouldn't say all, among some, that the COVID restrictions originate from the system that the PRC has, which limits oversight of executive authority. One thing to watch is whether the unhappiness with the COVID zero policy and the protests provide some sort of, I guess, inspiration or a sense among the Chinese population that they can push back against some of the more draconian measures that the Xi Jinping leadership has been imposing on them.
In the course of these protests, some people were openly calling for Xi Jinping to step down. How does the Chinese president recover from this moment?
The stepped up controls, both physically and also in terms of censorship online, is a reflection of, I suppose, the unhappiness of the state and the party towards calls for the party to step down and for the state chairman to back down as well. I guess the tactic that they've been using so far is to clamp down and try to talk about these issues because just talking about them would potentially give more attention and more oxygen, and also suggest to the protesters and their sympathizers that there is some traction to using that language and pushing forward. I'd have to say that previously with protests in China, often what would happen is that the local leader would get blamed and removed, right? And someone else would step in and implement largely the same policies but slightly looser. Now, because of this, the tightness of the tie between Xi Jinping and the COVID-0 policies, that becomes much more difficult, right? It's much more difficult to blame the local leader for misimplementation.
Taiwan's National Communications Commission says it has received multiple complaints regarding how election results were reported by some local media outlets.
目前为止，我们到今天中午，我们收到了5位的民众申诉案，大概是针对于票数的部分，可能某些候选人在某个时间点，大概持续了一段时间，他的票数比较没有变化，可是其他的候选人部分票数是有增长的。
The complaints come after Taiwan wrapped up its local elections on Saturday. As much of the nation was glued to their television screens, viewers noticed that some media outlets' figures were significantly different than the official numbers. The Central Election Committee has said that there were no abnormalities during Saturday's official vote count. Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party is reflecting after suffering bruising losses in Saturday's local elections. Rick Gloward spoke to local journalist Brian Hugh to find out what comes next for the party and for President Tsai Ing-wen.
What exactly do you think the local election losses mean for the ruling Democratic Progressive Party? What do you think is happening in the party headquarters right now?
The issues being voted on then are primarily economic. Voters are punishing the DPP for sluggish economic growth. Also, Taiwan's ticking demographic time bomb, that is also considered an issue regarding the elderly population, which is rising, the declining birth rate, unaffordable housing, and how to take care of all of these old people. And so the interesting thing is that voters decided they preferred the KMT's platform on that. Both parties proposed various solutions, but the DPP was the one that voters voted against. And so I think that is kind of punishing the DPP for failing to do enough on those issues. And so I think particularly because of legislative and presidential elections often being much more about cross-strait issues, which the DPP could not lean into as much this time around, then there's a possibility that DPP will consider this as just as usual. That doesn't do as well when it comes to local elections. And so then it might not actually change its messaging too much.
And what effect do you think the local election losses is going to have on Tsai and her ruling party and their leadership? Is she now a lame duck president?
In that sense, there's a power vacuum in the DPP. The party chair, Tsai, resigned, and so that potentially opens the way for challengers to Tsai's authority. So the ability to get stuff done in the next, effectively, 13 months will be much more difficult for Tsai. And so I think the ability to do that will really kind of be contingent. And I think that particularly, one will see perhaps more disparate messaging from the DPP as people are jockeying for being the presidential contender of the DPP. And so I think Tsai will not be able to control the party in that sense.
What impact will this local election loss have on the ruling Democratic Progressive Party as it gets ready for the all-important presidential and parliamentary elections, which are now just 13 months away?
I think a lot of it will have to do with the choice of presidential candidates, also who it decides to field as legislator candidates in the next round of elections. And so I think that kind of a shakeup within the party is really the biggest determinant. The question then is whether the DPP will adjust anything in terms of messaging, or if it will expect, as with the last elections, for cross-strait relations to kind of loom large. It's possible that the current set of protests in China, for example, will become another way to focus fire regarding this issue, such as occurred with Hong Kong in lead up to 2020.
A team of researchers at Taiwan's National Yangming Jiaotong University have found a surprising way for older adults to fight off dementia and maybe have a little bit of fun as well. Bing Wang reports.
Taiwan has a rapidly aging society. It's estimated that in 3 years, people over the age of 65 will make up about 20% of Taiwan's population. And as the average age grows, so have cases of dementia. But now, researchers at the National Yangming Jiaotong University have found some surprising treatments that can help stave off the disease. Dancing, and even video games.
运动或是一些认知的训练课程会有帮助，可是你要持续的一辈子上这样子的课，也有一定的难度，然后它也会少了一些趣味性，你会觉得枯燥而不容易持续。是不是能够透过像游戏，然后经过科学上的验证，可以得到一定的健康的效果？
Over 6 months, the research team recruited 120 older adults and divided them into 2 groups. One group danced, while the other played online mahjong. Both groups showed improvements in physical agility, cognitive function, and reaction times.
做的时间会大幅的下降，身体、心理、客观的结构式的脑影像改变都有非常明显的进步。
However, fun and games are not the only remedies required in the battle against dementia. The research team also recommends eating healthy, taking vitamins, and getting enough sleep. All of this combined is important to keeping Taiwan's aging population an active and healthy one. Alex Chen and Bing Wang for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up, Taiwanese architects turn to timber for a new generation of eco-friendly buildings.
For more news from Taiwan and around the world, visit TaiwanPlus.com and download the TaiwanPlus app.
We're at this century-year-old pastry shop where they have a kitchen that'll satisfy the gods' tummies. No walk-ins, pre-orders only, and it's all about passing on a tradition. Let's keep unveiling the story of Jing Chenlan.
You gotta like roll it out and then twist it, roll it kind of, and then you would roll it out again.
I would say this is like the best mooncake I've ever had so far. Best mooncake.
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. Taiwan's military has conducted parachute jumping exercises aimed at preparing its armed forces to respond quickly in the event of an attack. The exercises were carried out in the southern city of Pingdong on Tuesday. The military regularly practices these kinds of drills, which use the US-made C-130 aircraft to transport troops. The drills even attracted a group of local school children who were able to get front row seats to the action. The United States is considering supplying Ukraine with small precision bombs capable of hitting targets in Russian-held territory. The new weapons are smaller and cheaper compared to conventional ballistic missiles and only cost about $40,000 a round. When fired from an aircraft, the bombs can glide more than 100 kilometers and will give Ukraine the ability to hit Russian targets that are behind the front lines. If a deal is made, the weapons could be delivered as early as spring 2023. Hong Kong films took home 9 prizes from the Golden Horse Awards in Taipei earlier this month. Their success comes despite grim forecasts for the industry, which has fallen increasingly subject to government censorship. Brian Hugh speaks with Hong Kong filmmakers who say local movies are continuing to thrive despite the challenges they're facing.
It's a night of glitz and glamour for cinema of the Chinese-speaking world. And for Hong Kong filmmakers, this year's Golden Horse Film Awards were also a night of triumph, taking home 9 prizes. But pro-Beijing groups called for a boycott of the Taiwanese awards, and not all of the nominees were in attendance. In Hong Kong, movies have become a new front in the government's ongoing political crackdown. Amid increasing censorship, protest films have also become a way for exiles to preserve their memories. Prominent activists like former lawmaker Nathan Law have organized film festivals in their new homes to bring these to a wider audience.
We've organized the film festival. We have screened movies that are banned in Hong Kong while getting some of the movies that are with edge of social issue. The essential nature of art is to provoke thinking, is diversity. And these are the things that Chinese government and Hong Kong government hate. This is one way the government uses to control the kind of like narrative and discussion of the society.
This political crisis has bled over into the world of cinema, which had become reliant on big-budget co-productions aimed primarily at mainland China audiences. But for the duo behind the award-winning anthology Memories to Choke On, Drinks to Wash Them Down, this isn't necessarily a bad thing.
The last year or so, there's not many big co-production between Hong Kong and China that come out in cinema at all. Then instead, it's a lot of like new directors, like lower budget films. They deal with Hong Kong social issue in different kind of ways, and I think that is very exciting. I don't think that any of them was like aiming for a Chinese market. Audiences are more interested in movies that have a more local flavor.
Hong Kong cinema's sweep at the Golden Horses is proof that the industry is still thriving. Despite the city's deteriorating political situation, Hong Kong filmmakers say they shouldn't be counted out.
There's a lot of talk about Hong Kong film is dead, and people have got to put a finer point on this. Like, if you truly care about the well-being of Hong Kong and Hong Kong film, you got to distinguish between whether like big-budget mainstream movies made by the establishment are you talking about that, or are you actually talking about like everyone under the age of 45 making films in Hong Kong?
The Hong Kong film may not be the same kind of Hong Kong film that we have in the 80s or 90s.
Right.
It doesn't mean that Hong Kong film is dead.
No.
It just changed. It just changed to other form or other scale and a different viewership.
Leung and Riley were also in Taiwan seeking backers for their next film project. It's a direction that independent filmmakers are increasingly taking.
You know, I think that many communities around the world have always relied on foreign festivals, co-production strategies, and Hong Kong is going to rely on that more and more. And that's just how it is. You know, what are you going to do? It's fine.
By finding new ways to press on, Hong Kong filmmakers are proving that times of uncertainty and upheaval can still produce celebrated art. Alex Chen and Ryan Hill-Kilpatrick for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's most famous building, Taipei 101, showcases the epitome of the country's cutting-edge architecture. But away from the glass and steel of downtown Taipei, Taiwanese designers are working to make timber a construction material of the future. Stash Butler reports.
In 2014, the headquarters of engineering firm Woodtech became Taiwan's first high-rise wooden frame tower. It uses a new material called cross-laminated timber, otherwise known as CLT. The natural materials make CLT constructions both eco-friendly and cost-effective. They also allow for timber buildings to be put together at incredible speed.
结构的部分，从1楼到屋突，花了差不多18天就完成好了。因为台湾的工资上涨上去也下不来了，CLT 应该是未来的趋势。
CLT has sparked a renaissance in timber-framed buildings, and not just in Taiwan. The construction's now starting to appear around the world, like this 50-meter apartment block in Norway. Over a century ago, timber lay at the heart of Taiwan's homes and temples. But in recent decades, it's been replaced by concrete and steel. Now, architects like Hong Yucheng are working to bring wooden constructions back into the mainstream. He says that among other benefits, Taiwan's use of timber can help the planet.
森林在成长的过程，它是一直吸收二氧化碳，它把碳储存在里面，然后吐出氧气。整个的木材在形成过程，它是负碳。我们其他的不管是钢骨或者是混凝土，我们是排出二氧化碳。
This has led one university in southern Taiwan to launch a timber building competition. Teachers hope to both cut emissions and train a new generation of eco-conscious architects. Here in Taiwan, using timber is a process that looks two ways at once, back to the country's architectural traditions and forward to a carbon-neutral future. Andy Xue and Stash Butler for TaiwanPlus.
The mountain ranges in central Taiwan are famous for offering stunning views of the surrounding landscapes, but nearby tectonic plates are rubbing shoulders, which is causing some of the country's mountain peaks to now get even higher. Jean Van Trist tells us more.
It's the roof of Taiwan, a rugged alpine land where peaks approach 4,000 meters above sea level. Welcome to the Central Mountain Range, where people are few, but grand views are many. Recently, scientists have found that the mountains here are continuing to grow. This is due to the Philippine Sea Tectonic Plate, which lies just off Taiwan's east coast. It's pushing into the plate Taiwan sits on at a speed of 7 to 8 centimeters a year, forcing the land to reach ever greater heights.
花东纵谷以东这个地方，它的速度量会比较大一点，有可能在台湾中部，就是中央山脉这附近这个地方，是种种的力量，然后让它的山变高这样。
Over a long time, the southern edge of the range around Jade Mountain, Taiwan's highest peak, could experience particular growth.
现在比较碰撞比较激烈的哈，那这个还是在中南部这边，玉山南边的到恒春这边的山脉，就是会慢慢的在长高起来。
Squeezed by geological forces, Taiwan's landscape is far from settled. And in the distant future, its highest points will reach even closer to the sky. Damon Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Hawaii's Mauna Loa volcano is erupting for the first time in close to 40 years. Officials say so far there doesn't appear to be a threat to nearby communities and no evacuation orders have been issued. But the U.S. Geological Survey has put out a warning as lava flows from the volcano can be fast and change direction quickly. Thank you for watching today's TaiwanPlus News. Finally today, we leave you with images of the Hot Air Balloon Festival in Turkey's famous Cappadocia region. I'm Ethan Liu. Take care and see you next time.